So, namaskar to all of you, and welcome on this day of Karma Yoga. And we begin with the invocation. So, I'll share the screen. So, I welcome you all again, and Alok Bhai, I welcome you. Today, we have Dr. Alok Pandey uh, to speak on decision making in the context of Karma Yoga. And we see in the Gita, like when Arjuna has lost all its strength to take a decision, so he surrenders himself and then says to Krishna, Nishchitam Bruhi. So, how do we attain to that state of decisiveness so then the right action can be performed? And today we have the best mind to speak about it. So, I welcome you, Alok Bhai, and then I request Deepa to give an introduction to Dr. Alok Pandey.
Good morning and namaste, everybody. Um, we have with us Dr. Alok Pandey today. He is a doctor of medicine with a specialization in psychiatry. And after serving in the armed forces, he is now retired and he spends his time in Pondicherry. He is also the founder editor of NAMA, the Journal of Integral Health, and he edits the magazine All India. He edits a magazine, All India magazine, which is a monthly magazine from the Sri Aurobindo Society. He is also the author of 3 books. In addition to this, Alok Bhai spends a lot of time conducting workshops on various topics in India and abroad. I'm sure it will be a very enlightening session. Alok Bhai, over to you.
Namaste. Our life runs on two parallel streams, as it were, and both intersect, meet, now part, now come again, and they have an intimate bearing on our life. One is an outer stream which moves towards outer goals, outer things, outer achievements, outer successes, outer objects. And another which is an inner stream which moves towards inner goals, inner achievements, inner experiences, inner realizations. And the relation between the two is very interesting because based on how we receive the outer experiences, we grow within. And based on how we grow within, has an impact and a bearing on how we respond to outer life. So it's a constant process, a never ending process. And the other important thing to realize is that unlike animals, up till animals, evolution is an unconscious process, largely an unconscious process. It's very interesting we speak about the law of karma. Nobody has ever asked whether law of karma applies to animals. Well, it doesn't apply to animals, for all we know. And the reason is very simple that animals are not individualized enough to make choices. So, leaving aside the metaphysical part, whether karma is reward, punishment, this life, that life, it's a learning curve, whatever we may, all that can be debated and discussed. But one thing is there that we as human beings are called upon to make choices. We just can't escape it. So when people say, well, I didn't want to do it, but uh, I did it because I was pressed by somebody or someone in the environment and society. So I asked them that, what's your age? Well, I'm 18, so or 15. So the next question is that, well, finally, who said yes? Well, I said yes, but under pressure. So this but aspect goes away because ultimately, the man who signs, like in any document, when you sign a document, ultimately you are the one who is accountable. If you ask the person that, he may say that, well, I signed because Mantriji had told me, because somebody pressurized me. No, because I have signed ultimately. I had a choice. I had a choice to resist and say no and take the consequences, or to say yes and take the consequences. Consequences will always follow up on choices. So, the second thing which is easy enough to understand is the law of karma essentially is about recognizing this principle that there is something like choices. And at the same time, we understand that for a long time in human evolution, these choices are very unconsciously driven choices. So, as the Gita puts it, we are like a fly on the wheel, yantra rudini maya. So, while there we may use the word choices, but we are much like, still like an animal consciousness, largely unconscious. We are driven by every little, blow of breeze, wind, this direction, that direction, these suggestions, these impulsions, and we are moved by that. Now, that time we are not really making choices, though it may look like we are making choices. We are conditioned, as it were, by everything. So, what happens to the consequences? The consequences will come, but the consequences are to teach us to ultimately learn to make choices. So, this is the first step of learning, without which, actually speaking, no yoga can begin. We often speak about yoga as a set of techniques and processes. But we miss out a very crucial thing, and that has direct bearing upon decision making, is that until and unless we have become individuals, all this talk about surrender, offering, all this is no meaning, because what do we surrender? We surrender what we have taken, that, okay, this is mine, I surrender. But when there is nothing which really belongs to us, it's all come. Of course, there is a higher state in which we understand that nothing belongs to us. It has been given to us for a moment. But generally, when we are in a state of mass consciousness, that's why ego steps in. It has its purpose, as the mother puts it. It's a process of individualization which is important. And she says that, it creates a mold. And then we say, ki, well, this is what, through my choices, I have made these choices and now I offer it to the divine. We can't say that somebody else has made a choice for us and now I am offering it to you. Whatever be the choices, we have to make it. And second, we must know that when we make a choice, there are consequences. There are inner, outer, all levels of consequences. Now, when we understand these two things, which are both common sense and rational things to understand, then it empowers us. Otherwise, all our life we spend complaining, grudging. There's always somebody else who chose for us. So always there is somebody to be blamed. Well, but when we make our choices, face the consequences, accept it, then it is empowerment. And I think freedom, autonomy, empowerment begins from there. Learning to take responsibility for the choices we make. Then comes this step, that how do we make choices? As I said, the first step is to understand who we are. Who is it that is making choices? Otherwise, most of our choices will be mechanically driven and we will say that, well, we made a choice. So this process of individualization, if you really look at the Gita, it's very interesting that when when Arjuna asked Sri Krishna, tell me what I should do and what I should not do. Sri Krishna doesn't tell him you do this or you don't do this. He gives him a principle of action. It's a long journey. And at the end, he tells Arjuna, I have told you what I had to tell you, now you decide. This is something very profound. So there is a process that we have to undergo, and that process which equips us to make the right choices, of course, the right in the highest sense, is what is yoga. Because yoga is not withdrawing from life. We are in life. We have to make choices. Even as a yogin makes choices. Even an aspirant makes choices. So how does he do it? That's where the process that goes on. And one of the first things to learn in this process is that I am not this nature, which is one of the first fundamental teachings of the Gita, to learn to separate oneself from this entire field. Then we discover that what we call as myself, we often use the word I have made this choice. But who is the I? Well, the I in the morning is very different from the I in the evening. The I in the afternoon is very different from the I at night. The I yesterday is very different from the I of today. So, one of the first things we discover, which is so interesting, is that there is no one I. Where do we fix my I? It is like my I itself is shifting, like sands in shifting sands. So, the first thing we have to discover is at least one stable basis behind all this flux. Otherwise, we will think we are making choices, but we are just being driven. Wherever this so called I is being taken, there we go, and based on that, we make a choice. But where is that stable basis? That's why one of the first things in, of course, the integral yoga practice, the Gita hints about it, is to discover the true self within. Unless we have discovered, how are we going to make choices? I mean, we may think we are making, but it's constantly changing. So, this constantly changing I is the ego self. How does the ego self operate and decides? It decides on various things. One is conditioning from the past. So, it has received certain upbringing. Based on that, it values certain things. Ultimately, it's a question of valuing certain things. And based on those value systems which are inbuilt, based on our social conditioning, both from parents, teachers, and the environment and society at large, we and the information that is fed into us, the ego makes a choice. And most of the time, its choices are based on something which is outward. So, for instance, we are taught that, if you do this, you will get success, you will get name, fame, money. But we all know, and it doesn't require much deep spiritual speculation to see how very transient these things are. It doesn't require much. And yet, we are driven because the ego acts like that. It's a conditioning. At the most, at its highest, it tries to use reason. But reason also is a slave to what I outwardly want. So reason is used that, well, I want to be a rich man or a famous man. Then now reason comes in. What will lead you in that direction? And sometimes this reason can be entirely at the mercy of still lower forces. Then people rationally justify that, well, world is the way it is. Everybody in this world is compromised. So I can also compromise and I can do things, whatever, to achieve these goals, which anyway is everybody's goals. Now, when we live life like that, then frankly speaking, to even talk about choices has no meaning because, we use the word choices, but it's complete ignorance. So the first step is to discover, is there a stable principle behind the ego self? Now, if there is none, as some schools of thought affirm, then all this is meaningless. But if there is a true principle, something which is the stable basis, the unchanging self through all these mutable events, circumstances, then we must discover it. And that first thing is the psychic being. But before we discover it, we must learn to separate from the field of nature, at least know that this is not me. This simple exercise, practice, call it witnessing, sakshi bhav, contemplating, this is the power which is given to human beings. And people often say that, what differentiates human beings from animals is thought. I don't think so. Thought, if you look at the animal behavior, it looks like something within them is stirring. They may not think the way we think. Just as when we go beyond the realm of words and speech, there is another kind of thought which awakens within us, which is like a revelatory seeing. Similarly, animals do have some kind of a thought. That is how they plan and execute things. But what we can do is something which animals cannot do, is to learn to separate ourselves from our thought and be a witness to ourselves. This is something unique to human beings. Mentalized people can look at their actions, they can look at their vital impulses, but truly a developed human beings, that's how the mother puts it, that the sign of a developed mental being is that he is able to look upon his vital impulses, desires, emotions, and is able to master them by the help of reason. But what is the sign of a spiritual being? She says someone who can detach even from the mind and look at his own thoughts. That's when true spirituality begins, that we can look at our thoughts. Where are they coming from? Where are they going? Which direction are they leading me? And he is touching that master key, because as we think, so our actions and they get inbuilt. It becomes habit, character, and all those things which we are all well aware of. So to learn to watch over the thoughts, where is this thought coming from? And then we go still further and discover the will, the motive behind all things. Now we have a very convenient habit of giving a motive, attributing a motive. Unfortunately, more often to others. Whereas we are hardly aware of our own motives. Always we have a very good motive. It's a convenient motive. Oh, I am a good guy. I was doing this because of this reason, that reason. But others did like this. But when we really look carefully and look deeply, look sincerely, then we discover no, it is not like that. We ourselves had a motive which we had conveniently covered with a veil of reason. We had justifications. So we thought that this is my reason, but this was not really true. The reason was used and hired by lower impulses, just like a person hires vakil, advocate, and says, "You fight my case." Now, advocate's real business is to explain to his client that, well, it's not about fighting your case. I may fight your case, but I want to know the truth because my main task is to bring truth to justice. That's my task. That's the task of an advocate. It's not that because you have paid me money, therefore I am going to save you. I will give you a counsel. If you have done something mischievous and wrong, I may give you a counsel how to come out within the framework of law. That's the task. But then, just like reason, the advocate says, okay, how much money you are going to give me, and I am going to win you the case, even if you are somebody who is a criminal. So similarly, we use reason to satisfy and justify our lower impulses. So this is the first thing that we discover when we step back and try to understand and look at life and look at ourselves in a more dispassionate way, so to say. So this separation. Second thing that we discover, and that's a little disconcerting discovery, is that we are not made of one piece. As I said, we are made of many, many pieces. See, when we look at the entire evolution of the Gita, we see that Arjuna himself is fraught with so many inner contradictions. And the inner contradictions are not between, we think the choices is between good and bad, right and wrong. For a developed human being, the choices can be right and rival right. That's how Arjuna's choice actually starts from a very high level. He is not asking that, well, I want to enjoy the kingdom, should I fight and slay my brother? No. His choice starts from a very high level of personal ethics and the ethics of that time. That, well, I know it is not good for me to, kill people and just dominate and enjoy the kingdom, because he's a Deva type. He's not an Asuric type of humanity. He's a person who is noble, Shrestha in temperament. So he asks that, should I not? I don't feel I should. He has actually made a decision. I should not, because it's not worth enjoying a kingdom at this expense. So there are two rival rights. One is the right of a Kshatriya to fight for what is true and what is just and what is fair. On the other side, there is another right that he should not be the cause of so much loss and bloodshed in his own family members, make them suffer, be a cause of suffering to them. So he's caught between two rival rights. And this is the problem with many people who have risen to a level of nobility, sattvic human beings. And there is a resolution. Normally we want to resolve it at the level of the mind, but we are unable to. So when we observe all these contradictions within, and the ego will always play with them, then we have to discover that there is the principle of action has to be found in the origin of action. There's a very cryptic phrase in the Gita. It's not cryptic, but it has many implications, profound implications. One of them is that Shri Krishna says, I am the origin of actions. I am the one from whom the action is originated. What does it mean? It means basically that action, the impulsion to action, the power to execute an action, the knowledge that is needed for an action, all this flows from something much higher beyond the mind. It flows from the divine consciousness, it flows from the source, it flows from the Shakti, the divine mother. Doesn't matter which way what term we use it. But the impulsion to action, the knowledge for the action, and the power to execute the action comes from there. And the great difficulty of life is how to really listen to that and attune to that. Because at the level of the mind, there will always be conflicting ideals. This is right, this is also right. And you don't know which one to choose. So the mind begins to see consequences. But this is the most irrational way to look at life. Yes, I use the word irrational because Little life experience teaches us that what we are looking in terms of consequences are immediate consequences. But we have no idea that these very consequences, how they will impact our inner life, how even they are going to impact our outer life. So when we look at consequences, then it begins to interfere. It's like a noise which begins to interfere with our own inner state in which we can receive. So that's why the first principle of the Gita, one of the most profound logical principles, it is a deep spiritual principle. But even logical thing that Arjuna, stay away. Don't act thinking of what result you are going to get. Why? Because anyways it's not in our hands to start with. So why waste your energy on that direction? Second, well, does it mean that shouldn't have things in my mind that I want to go in this direction or that direction? Of course, we must have an aim because without that there cannot be any choice. But at the same, it's not like I'll do whatever comes to my mind and say I don't care for consequence. It doesn't mean that. I have to act on the basis of the aim that I have put in front of me. But when the results, when Shri Krishna speaks about the results, it means the immediate results may be favorable to our ego self, may not be favorable, but that the goal that we have chosen, that has to be there within us. So one of the necessities without which we cannot really make choices before we even arrive at that stage of the highest consciousness pouring into us is to be clear about an aim. Before we have discovered the psychic being, before we are receiving direct guidance, not just guidance is still a stage behind. Guidance is like I am there and there is a guide. It's still too much of separation. But this is a state when all action is a natural, spontaneous development of the divine within. But that takes time. So people often, when they hear all this, they start saying, okay, fine, good, very nice, wonderful. But then, you go back to life because it's a long journey. So let's start from the basics. The basic is, what is my aim? Now, we have two kinds of aims. I mean, if you look at it from the broader perspective. So people think about aim, I want to earn money, I also want to be successful, I want to have a good name, I want to earn money honestly, I want to look after the family. Now, this entire range of I want is all temporary transient aims. It's valid, it's not about valid or invalid. But we must know that when I achieve my aim, this will be for a term and a season. A day will come when this will slip past us. And then we will wonder, what do I do next? I have so many Air Force friends and military friends. So what happens when they retire? Because so many of them have not thought beyond the retirement frame. Many people. They want to earn money and then sit back and enjoy. Not knowing that you can't sit back and enjoy like that. You have no occupation, your mind will give you an occupation. And one of the worst occupations the mind gives when we have no outer occupation is obsession with oneself. What's happening to my body, what's happening to my children, grandchildren, and all around. The mind is obsessed. And people don't realize that, sit back and relax and enjoy. It's almost like a euphemism. It doesn't, practically apply because we had kept an aim at 60, that aim is over. So what happens? There is no aim. अब तो हम प्रतीक्षा कर रहे हैं यमराज जी के आने की. We are waiting for the god of death to come or whatever. कब आए हमको उठा ले जाएं. This happens because we never really had an aim, or rather we had very transient aims. But there is another aim which we can place before ourselves. And this is how I feel that we should put together. One is various temporary transient aims. If we have it, we must know that it will go away one day. Second is eternal aims. And that's what yoga implies. Yoga implies that there is an aim beyond the little life in which we are trapped, encased, the life of our body, our outer personality, what I ignorantly call as myself. There is a much greater aim, and that aim is the eternal. So the choice that we have to make, we must make, and that's what I see that at the end Gita takes us to that level, is things which are temporary. The kingdom is temporary. The victory is temporary. In fact, Arjuna later on loses when he most wants to win. The relatives are temporary. The bloodshed is temporary. All these things are temporary. But what is eternal is that alone is worth having. If this feeling, this thought, this impulsion, this aspiration can awaken within us, then life would be beautiful and wonderful. It will be an endless progression. Now, does it mean that I have to believe in God when I use the word eternal? Well, it depends upon which way we look at it. God is a term, and much depends on what meaning we put into that term. But what it implies is that there are things which do not come to an end with the cessation even of the body. And one of them is that there is an eternal progression. If we just have in my mind that I don't want to stop after a certain age, I don't want to stop progressing. I want to move forward, conquer new horizons, new vistas. I want to enter into that momentum where there is a never ending perfection, because perfection is not an end point, unlike what we believe. Every little thing can be made more and more perfect, more and more beautiful. Where is the end of it? And the reason it can be done is because we keep changing. The more we grow, we look at the same thing with a new vision. And therefore, to learn to improve constantly and to progress endlessly is one of the simplest aims and beautiful aims. An eternal aim, if I may use the word. The word eternal is not used when people say, I am in pursuit of endless progress. I am in pursuit of perfection. Of course, by perfection, I don't mean those fastidious, finicky people who are. Have you put this picture in this way or that way? Well, that's not perfection. That's obsession. Though the word used is perfection, but perfection means how I can develop more faculties, greater capacities, how they can all harmonize together, how I can arrive at ways of knowledge which transcend my limited human mind and its capacity, how I can love truly, more deeply, more beautifully, how I can arrive at a harmony which doesn't break with the first loud voice that I hear in my atmosphere or environment, how I can discover peace within myself regardless of a battle going on outside, how I can always be in a state of constant joy. Now, when we place such aims before ourselves, then we are actually in the right group. We are in moving towards eternal. So these are things which are not taken away. And that's what we can now understand the law of karma in this deeper sense. It is in this great voyage that we are all there. And this voyage is the voyage of the Supreme. And when we look at things from that perspective, then we find all our quarrels, our misgivings, our jealousies, ambitions so meaningless and pointless. We are all struggling to arrive at that kind of a perfection. But what are we ultimately ending up with? We are ending up with getting involved with very, very meaningless, temporary and transient things. So this is how we have to start looking, that I am in pursuit of an endless perfection and progression. Second thing, when we try to do that, now we can start that where is the key to that endless perfection and progression? That key is within us, and that key is above us. Now, the moment we take that approach, that we want to discover that part which truly aspires for constant growth, then we discover that go in search of a deeper discovery and something which is higher, something which is beyond the mind. Now, this second step is, before even we undertake within the frame of nature, let's put the highest spot within us. So, what is that highest spot? What is it that deeply moves me? What is it that is my passion? What engages me, interests me most completely? So, most people will say something outer. Well, this job or that. No, it's not that. Why this job engages us? So, when we go deeper and deeper, then we discover that behind all these things, there is a quality, an aspect, an attribute of the divine. And that engages me. Take, for instance, I can take my profession, the being a doctor. So you ask a typical person who is going for medicine, why do you want to be a doctor? So unless the file is corrupted, children give the right reply. But when the file is corrupted, well, it's a very respectable thing. Well, if it's a respectable thing, you can do many things which will give you respect. If respect is what you want. Then, of course, some people still crude aims, they want to earn money and they give a lot of money. So I can understand that they are simply filling their pockets of the hole they have created. And that's not medicine at all, whatever else it is. Then there are some people who take interest in a particular subject. They say, I want to know about the human body, how it works. And in a particular field, I want to know about that. So now, if it is knowledge of a certain kind, then I have one good goal, which is knowledge. Now, knowledge is empowerment, but then we should not stop with, let's say, specialization. I mean, I myself started like that. It was not that I want to feel compassionate towards humanity, but it was like I want to know and understand how the human mind works. Very soon I realized the limitations of whatever, I had studied in during my MD, and I realized this is not what can give me knowledge. It is giving me scraps of information. And this information, the way it is presented, is not giving me the truth, and even this information is very inadequate. So then you discover that if you want knowledge, you have to become student of your own self. It's not in the book, Swadhyaya. So then you take a pursuit of knowledge, and when you pursue knowledge, you go beyond the frame. See, that is how we see that in the great ages, it was not denied. You start with something material, that I want to know about the human body. Start from the material point of view. Understand how the anatomy works, physiology works. But now you biochemistry work. But now you want to go further. What impels these nerves? What happens in the nerve currents? What happens in the blood vessels? Why the heart begins to beat in a certain way? What disturbs its rhythm? So you go to physical and physiological and psychological causes. Then one goes still deeper. And then you discover that our body, the great discovery that we can make pursuing just this one line of knowledge, that the body is simply a pedestal and a tool, a vessel, a vehicle for immense forces that pour into it. Then when you go into the background of these forces, you discover that behind all these forces there is one power, one knowledge. And then you have the aha feeling. And nobody has to tell us this. Oh, that means my body is a vessel and an instrument, a vehicle, a channel for the universal forces and for the divine to pour and use it as an instrument. The whole perspective changes. So then, if that knowledge comes to me, then I discover what I should do with my body. But otherwise, if I just look at my body as simply a machine and I am knowing everything about the machine, I am not knowing the most important thing, that little dot which is inside. So this pursuit of knowledge, or it could be, I want to help people. There are 100 ways of helping people. Why do I want to help people? Is it an ambition for name, fame, etc.? Again, when we go deep inside, this urge to help, we'll discover deep within it's the distortion of a different great truth. It could be because one is generous by nature, or because one has deep compassion. But compassion comes when we rise higher. Compassion at the same level is not compassion but pity. It's like you sympathize with people who are caught in the same muddle. But compassion is something which has risen to a height and looks at the ignorance in which human beings are trapped. So what I'm saying is that basically we have to work backwards and discover what is it that is my highest. Is it love? Is it justice? Is it knowledge? Is it strength? Is it harmony? Is it beauty? Is it bliss? Doesn't matter. Is it peace? Take that one thing and start weaving life around it. The highest idea that I can envisage. It will start with the idea because we are given a mind. So mind, let's use the mind in the way it should be used. And the way it should be used is to turn it inward and upward, up current, to discover what is that idea that moves me most. It is like automatically if that idea is there, passion and interest and emotions and reason, everything starts aligning. And for each one, this will be unique and different. It could be the idea of transformation, as Sri Aurobindo says so beautifully. A prayer, a master act, a king idea. So it's a king idea, the idea that crowns my personal life. And for each one it would be. So very often when people say, oh, you must live for the divine. When Mother says it's from the highest standpoint. But many people don't understand what really divine. So the idea. So what is that idea? We must discover the central idea within me. And each of us is born with that idea. Now, if we have not discovered that idea that moves me, well, then we have to engage with life, understand, search for it, dig deep, read, till we touch a point where we say, this is it. This moves me most. And then we pursue that idea and start organizing. Because now we have at least a name. Which means that supposing I am moved by the idea of beauty. And I have to act. So how will I make my choices? I'll not make my choices based on right and wrong. That's a reason speaking. But I'll make my choices based on, is my speech, is my conduct consistent with my ideal of beauty or not? It may be the right thing, But it may not be the beautiful thing. I mean, there are things which are, that's why it is said, Satyam Vada, Priyam Vada. It's not enough just to be right. It is important to be beautiful. It's not enough just to be true. It's important that when this truth is expressed, it creates harmony, because truth is supreme harmony. It gives delight because it's also delight. So we start with this trail of idea and then we go right up to the end. When we touch any idea and take it to its source, we will touch the divine without using the word. Because all these idea forces are leaping out from the one divine. In the mind, they are mistranslated. We have our own understanding of beauty, of love, knowledge, all this is okay. But we keep going further, we ultimately discover the very source of it. We should not stop with our first understanding and explanation. And then we start organizing our life. Then rest is very simple. I have to make a choice. Is it going with my ideal or not going with my ideal? If it is with my ideal, I make that choice. People won't understand me. Fine, doesn't matter. Anyways, who will understand? I often give this example of Kallu ka Gadha. That Kallu and his father are going with a donkey, and people start observing and they remark this, how stupid these people are. They have a donkey and they are walking with the donkey. So they think, yes, that's quite right. So they both sit on the donkey. Then people remark, look at it, poor donkey, they are not even bothered about the donkey. So the father gets down. Then people remark, look at this young boy. He is sitting on the donkey, letting his father walk. So he gets down, makes the father sit. Then people start making remark, look at this father. What kind of an heartless father is he? Ever saw a father who will enjoy life and not let his son of tender age sit on it? So they both come down. Now they don't know what to do. So they finally tie the donkey with all four legs and start carrying him. Then people again look how stupid they are. So please don't take decisions thinking of people. This is the worst thing to do. When mother was asked duty toward the divine and others, she says, one who has turned to the divine, wants to serve the divine, has no more any duties. So we have to understand there is a whole hierarchy. That's another thing we see in the Gita. It's not that thinking about your relations and others is not good. But in the hierarchy, we have to understand that there are four basic standards through which human beings act, and they form a hierarchy. One is egoism. I do think because I want pleasure, hedonistic principle, purely ego-driven. The false individuality, the individuality that is promoted by the asuric consciousness, that I am an individual, I decide, I make my choices, but actually it's made purely based on my selfish interest. I'll go to Canada, I'll go here, there. Why? Because I want to enjoy, I want to earn money, it's my right. What about parents? Well, I'll send money regularly. Now, this is a choice based on purely egoistic individuality. Nothing too great about it. Most human beings will make such choices. The next is to curtail that kind of asuric, egoistic individuality. There is the sense of society. No. Think about others. Think about your parents. Think about your relatives. Think about society. So then people try to form a balance. So as I said, they go to, nothing wrong with Canada, please. Canada, US, go wherever you want to, Malaysia or France or anywhere. Or best is, of course, live in India, because there is no place like India, I must say. Because while others are bhog jonis, you want to exhaust your good karma, so go to paradise. Now no place is paradise, incidentally, but if you want to evolve, come to India. So yoga is done here. Anyways, that's an aside. Now the point is that, beyond the egoistic individual, there is society. That's why, what does reason do? It teaches us about that. Along with democracy. Democracy is not anarchy. Very often we think democracy is anarchy. I'll do what I feel like. Why? Because I have the freedom of speech, Democracy is not anarchy. Democracy is the reign of reason. And this reason takes into consideration the common culture, the common environment, totality of things, and then it creates a reason, so that there is a balancing between cause and effect, between this and that, and everybody tries its best. So this is the second level, when we make our choices based on reason, which considers everything, the people around, the society, the parents, and the world at large. But is this the end? There is something still greater. And that greater is the true individual impulsion from within. And there we have the example of a Buddha, of a Sri Ramakrishna, of Vivekananda, of Sri Aurobindo, the mother, and all of them. How they chose. If you really look at it, now people often speak about Buddha's tyag. He walked on the threshold and walked away from kingdom because Buddha had everything that outwardly we can have, but he did not have that thing which he was looking inside. So it's something great. Look at Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo had everything that you can have outside. He was not just ruling a little kingdom. He was ruling the hearts and minds of people of that time. If you really read through those articles and the newspaper cuttings, people regarded him not just as a great man, a saint, an avatar, a yogi, a vibhuti. That's how people looked upon him. Adoration, adulation. A whole nation's honor he was commanding. So much so that the dread of Sri Aurobindo had spread right into the British Parliament that this is the most dangerous man in India. Now he had that, what can be called as outwardly whatever one would want. But inwardly also he had some of the most profound experiences of nirvana, of Vasudevam Sarvamiti. What was he seeking then? Why did he make this choice of coming to Pondicherry? Because he realized that there is something still greater. And that greater is, of course, nature is not equipped for this divine descent which can change our instrument. Our instruments are ill prepared. Humanity is ill prepared. And he entered into a larger revolution of preparing the larger field of liberating it from ignorance and eventual transformation of nature. So, meaning thereby that this, the individual, when he makes the choice, now Sri Aurobindo leaves that, he left again his wife. It's not that he didn't love. We can see in 1918 what his letter is when she leaves the body. All this he left behind and moved on to a place of which nobody knew what's going to happen. Moved on by an inner impulsion. Now this inner impulsion, when we discover, then we are truly have entered the stage of true individual. We may use the word psychic being, doesn't matter, or soul, and terms, we should not get caught into terms. But this is something which acts beyond the frame of the limited time and space and environment in which we are landlocked. It opens doors to horizons. That choice can change everything in our life. Imagine a Sri Aurobindo who would have continued in the freedom struggle as some people wanted. Well, maybe he would have been called father of a nation, I don't know, depending on the politics of that time. Maybe he could have gone to some big name, either sacrificed, the British government would have found a way and sent to gallows or Andaman, and his name would have been another name written among the freedom fighters. But have you noticed that Sri Aurobindo's name is seldom mentioned as a revolutionary? It is very interesting. I find this interesting. He should be, without a doubt. He is the key to that. But also because Sri Aurobindo went way beyond it. He is now not only the father of a nation, he is not even the father of humanity. He has become the father of the new creation. This he could do because he made that choice. And what is needed to make that choice? Two things which we miss upon life. It's not enough to know. We must have the courage and the sincerity. Now this impulsion comes to everybody. It's not that only some people have the privilege of having Krishna by their side. Krishna is in everyone. The Divine Mother impels all of us. There are waves of time which can change our destiny. They take us onto a very different road, but then we fall back. Heaven's call is rare, rarer the heart that heeds. And why this happens? Because we don't have the courage. Yes, unfortunately, we don't trust the divine enough. This lack of courage comes from many reasons. Oh, how could I? Or it could come from attachment to our past way of life. And when we lack that courage, and when we have lacked that sincerity to follow upon the choice that is really dawning upon us, then life becomes miserable. A person who has not listened, who doesn't know that there is something like inner voice or a higher truth, well, he goes through all the consequences which will eventually lead us to understand their temporary nature. But one who has heard the call of the eternal and still does not have the courage and the sincerity to follow it, as Sri Aurobindo says, thrice woe to those. Why? Because then life is not only outwardly miserable, outwardly maybe there is everything, but inwardly it is miserable, like Kansa, like Ravana. It's a miserable life because you have not heard that tremendous call. So to know is first part, but then to act and live, that is the next part. So it's not enough just to know how to take the decisions. So how do we tune into this inner and this higher, as I've said, to take the trail of the idea, cut off this noises of this result, that result. It is one of the things which is like a noise. It doesn't allow us to cut off all these suggestions from everybody. People will give suggestions, let them give suggestions. But sit quietly. Sit quietly in a moment of reckoning. And then what do we do? Ask even the reason to be quiet for a moment. Two things. One is that the decision that I have to make, is it something based on something temporary, or is it going to help me in my quest for the eternal? Meaning, thereby, very sincerely, very clearly, we have to look at that decision and see how is it going to help me in my deeper quest. Because very often we think that changing, when Mother was asked about changing environments, she says, those who are not ready to change within want to change their environment and circumstances and situations. But those who change within do not need to change outer environment and situations. So up till a point, it's okay. That's how we evolve. It's a very slow process. I go from one place to another and I evolve. It's a very slow process. It's like changing a life, being born in new circumstances. But those who are really marked out for yoga change within and therefore they evolve. So how is this decision going to really help me in terms of change? And that's where we see Sri Aurobindo coming all the way to Pondicherry, because he needs that space. You need that space and time. Spirituality cannot be practiced without that. One needs that. Even in Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga doesn't mean morning till night I am all the time busy running from here to there. We need that space, we need that time when we can be with ourselves, speak to our deeper self, inmost self. So, is this change going to help me in that direction or no? So, this is one thing which we have to see, the long-term consequences of a goal. Not just immediate short-term. Short-term successes are the worst kind of decisions. But long-term, why am I going? The hidden motives, as I said. And when we have seen it, then enter into a state of deep peace, referring all of this to the divine presence within and the divine presence above, from where the impulsion comes. Maybe we may feel nothing at that moment. Don't worry, get up, don't take a decision. Maybe next day again there is this cloud moving around. Never take a decision when one is depressed, angry, agitated. That's the worst state to be in. So when this happens, sit down, clear that cloud. That is the thing to be done, not decision to be taken. So let that cloud be cleared. Wait 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. Doesn't matter. One day, a deep peace will begin to descend. Why? Because we are earnestly aspiring. Tell me, Ma, what should be done? And if we continue with this aspiration, now there are people who may get a direct, immediate impulsion, but I am not speaking of that. But wait, look how Sri Aurobindo waited, even at that level of yoga. When Sister Nivedita told him that, you go away from here because, British police is after you. Sri Aurobindo says, he laughed and told Sister Nivedita, I think yesterday was, or 2 days back was a birthday. And he said that, that I have given myself to the hands of the Divine Mother. Do you think now I can act without the Divine Mother's will? So he is waiting for the will, and the will comes as a command. It may come as a command if you are ready, but more often than not, it will come like a gentlest of indication inside. Move in this direction. So we have the courage and the sincerity to move in that direction. What if we are not able to move in that direction? That's another challenge. Well, in that case, we must know fully that there is a deep insincerity, and yet, whatever direction we have moved, the goal should never be forgotten. So keep repositioning, reorienting like the GPS. If one has moved in a certain direction, let's say somebody wants to live alone and pursue the path of yoga, but ends up getting married. This happens. Both have their advantages and disadvantages. Doesn't matter. One way is everything is destroyed, gone. No. Now reorient this new life towards that. Together towards that. That is always possible. When we have division in the being, then the problem comes. When we don't have division, when is there no division? When we look at the one and the goal is clear before us. Goal is the divine. Doesn't matter. One person together, through this job, through this occupation, through that. But we should not fool ourselves. We should know that, well, this is an insincerity which came up. I'm not saying that marrying is an insincerity. I'm not saying that. Insincerity is inside. But one was driven by pure desire and lust. There are two kinds of togetherness. One is where one is driven by desire and lust. When it is that, it is an insincerity, whatever justification we may give. When it is moved by a deeper love, which is not wanting anything, expecting anything, then that is something else. So we have to differentiate within. Insincerity and sincerity, the marker is inside, not outside. There are people who may live alone all their life and yet not be, and claim to pursue yoga and yet may be only locked in the ego self. So basically it is about the purpose why we are entering into anything. Is it leading me towards the goal or not? But even if, supposing one has entered into a situation where one is knowing that, well, it will make the goal further. It will make the goal further, but never lose sight of it. Keep it in sight. Who knows what looked like suddenly as if you have made a little shift. Someone used to tell me some very good example. And he said long back that, see, he gave the example of the Apollo mission. He said, your rocket, everything has to be aligned, it has to reach the moon. Now, as it takes off, just a little deviation, you may say it's 1 degree. But 1 degree deviation may mean it may go in very different direction. Yes, with the rocket it can happen. But if you know how to keep repositioning, you will come back to that. This is the beauty of human aspiration, human faith, human will. So keep the eyes steadily on the goal wherever one may be, whatever be the situation, and then we will see that there is a hand which helps, guides, directs, and leads us towards that. And the best situation for that is to stay in a state of peace. Peace, quietude, equanimity, most important fundamental practice of yoga and the least practiced. If we are not in a state of equanimity, means that there is constant turbulence, constant inner noise. Leave aside the results. We may not worry about the results. Still the mind is restless, the vital is restless, the emotions are heaving up and down. That means that the true divine impulsion cannot come inside. Even if it comes, it will be broken into many disconnected elements and we will not know which way to go. So allow this peace to settle down. Practice equanimity. The more equanimity we practice, the more we will experience the impulsion and the power to execute it. Because action comes from there. That's why the highest verdict of making the choices is, Lord, let thy will be done. Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja aham tva sarva papebhyo mokshishyami masucha. It's not a religious teaching. Some people, oh, this is very good. I'll make my surrender. You will free me from all sin and evil. This not fair. What about others? No, it's not that. It means that the person has now chosen to obey the divine impulsion. So all the consequences go to the divine. It's plain logic. And it's even military logic. When you actually take the, or anything in anywhere, ultimately, who takes the consequences? The one who finally signs. So if we pass the note to the divine and say, you put your seal, stamp and signature on it, then he says, okay, and he is not like us. He takes responsibility. He has taken responsibility of creation also. That's why he keeps coming as avatar again and again. And then he says, okay, now I am responsible for you because you had referred this decision to me. And because you have referred, maybe even if you have not heard the voice, still he takes it that, well, cognizance of the fact that you referred this decision to me. But if we don't refer the decision to the divine, act on our own, he says, okay, fine, you sign. If we say consequences, well, you see, you signed it. So, but even then, we can keep on doing it. When we have done something with our own signature, we can now tell him, okay, fine, I did it, but now you take the responsibility, he will take. So we can always reorient and reposition ourselves. There is nothing like an irreparable damage when we make choices. Provided we remember the goal, provided we turn to the grace, provided we turn to that great source of love, wisdom, splendor, power, which alone acts in this world. So when we start living in that consciousness by making ourselves in a state of quietude, peace, calm, tranquility, inner joy, then that divine impulsion comes, takes hold of us like a breath, it moves us. This is the highest karma yoga, where there is no more mind, vital, heart, all these intervening. The action comes directly, takes hold and acts. Shubindu speaks of it so beautifully in Nirvana and works in the world. The only difficulty that then remains is the imperfection of matter, which is where you enter into the yoga of transformation. So the more quieter we are, the more action will develop within us. Because in everyone there is only one power which acts. This is the oneness to which we must rise. It's not this person, that person. There is only one power which is working everywhere, in every creature, in every being. And the more we tune into that, the more our actions will become naturally chime with God's natural right and truth. Shubindu uses the word God's natural truth, God's natural right. Right is not what my mind thinks right and wrong. That's what is given to it. But there is something called as God's natural right, that will, which always works with perfect wisdom for taking into account the totality of our own life and the life of those around, and eventually to help each one progress in their own way. Let me give an example and then we can close. Take, for instance, a Buddha. People often say he left, and what about Yashodhara, his wife, his son? Take it the other way. If Buddha would have remained, maybe she would have been happy. Such a good, noble, sensitive human being. But imagine a Buddha who walked over. It's not only that Buddha helped millions of people, even his wife and son. Imagine what state they would have progressed. Driven by this idea that, look here, my father had such a courage to renounce everything for the sake of great truth. Maybe immediately some reactions or whatever, but eventually they progress. So when we take a decision, keeping in mind only the divine will, that little story of Champaklalji, where he continued to wear Janeu. And one day the mother asked him, why are you wearing? Because she wanted to point out here, she has to train him for the ultimate perfection. Why are you wearing it? Well, I don't much believe in it now, but my father would feel bad if I don't wear it. So mother gave him a hint. She again didn't make a choice for him. She said, but if you remove it, maybe your father will progress. So you see how beautiful it can be. He may feel bad. That's what with Amrita when he removed the choti. His father felt bad. But that was the turning point in Amrita's life. So divine impulsion doesn't act according to our little outer good and bad, our little outer right and wrong, our little outer success and failure. It takes into consideration large spaces of time, our ultimate future and the destiny of all those whom we ignorantly believe depend on us. Nobody really depends on us. They have their own individual destiny, and maybe by not making the divine choice within me, I am actually withholding them back. But when we act based on this inner divine impulsion, then not only we help ourselves, we help the whole world. We help creation move one step forward. This is the meaning of Lok Sangrahart, where a person is for the good of all creatures. Carrying the march of Sarva Bhutite Rata. Sarva Bhutite Rata is not opening hospitals, giving money and feeding the poor. Sarva Bhutite Rata is move forward toward the truth you have seen, even if it be a battle, and it will bring good to everybody. So this is what is meant by carrying the march of civilization together, because one person who forges ahead, obeying the divine impulsion, creates ripples in 10 others around. By this very act, he creates a vacuum and others are just drawn naturally. That is the inevitable destiny of mankind. So this is the highest impulsion which we can obey, but short of it, several layers, levels, the entire Gita is there. Nishkam karma, remember and offer, turn within, constant state of remembrance, do all deeds offering it to the divine, practice inner quietude, inner equanimity, inner peace, take the decision from the highest possible standpoint available to us. It may be reason or the deepest possible impulsion. Clear the weeds of desires which distort and create noise and take it in a wayward direction. Attraction for pleasure, personal gains, profits. And then when there is a state of deep peace and quietude and equanimity, either we'll feel from deep within a little small voice, or we'll experience the massive descent of the force of God and be driven by it as a leaf is driven by the breath of the divine. Thank you. Namaste.